Welcome to this week's video where I discuss what I think is important for investors to consider over the next 5 to 10 business days. We're going to talk about choppiness in the market. A lot of investors realizing the markets are not as smooth right now. A lot of choppiness there. We're going to talk about what many are calling peak reopening. What does that mean? And what does that mean for the markets? And lastly, Canadian bank earnings. Our major Canadian banks will be reporting earnings this upcoming week. What does that mean for the stocks themselves, and how are these banks really doing during this pandemic? Investors over the last couple of weeks have come to me and they've asked, why are markets so choppy? We're seeing days where the markets go up, followed by days where the markets go down. Maybe 2 up days and then 2 down days. And they're asking me if I'm concerned. Well, I guess in my profession, I'm always concerned. But really, with respect to the choppiness, I'm not. This is something that I've been expecting for a little while now. Other videos that we've had, a radio show, I've talked about market choppiness, and I figured that it would happen the second part of this year. And it really has to do with higher interest rates, higher inflation, central banks talking about taking away some of the candy from all of us, some of the stimulus, some of the programs that our government has put in place to stimulate our economy will now start to dwindle as we move forward. So the market doesn't really like that. They would rather have all that candy to enjoy. So as we move forward into the second half of this year, look for the markets to continue to get choppy. But again, it's something that I am expecting, and you should expect as well. I still believe the markets can go higher, but it may not be as smooth as what we've seen over the last 6 months. Recently, I've been told about this term called peak reopen. And I'm wondering, what is peak reopening? Well, this person described it as, this is as good as it gets. We're seeing GDP numbers, 6% growth, perhaps as much as 10% growth in the US over the course of this year. And a lot of investors are wondering, is this as good as it gets? Are earnings for these companies as good as it get right now? And so many investors have been looking at a lot of this good news, this reopening news, especially out of Europe and in the United States, as a sign as this is as good as these companies will do, that things cannot get better. Things have gone so well over the last 9 months or so. How can things get better? So in many instances, we've seen that investors have sold the market, kind of sell the news phenomenon. And so what I believe is that I don't think that this is as good as it gets. I think we can get even better throughout the course of the second half of this year. I think we're going to see companies continue to do well. I think when Europe really comes online, gets back to more of a normal situation, France, Germany, Spain, I think we're going to see another boost to the market from a global perspective. And here in Canada, as we come online as well, that will only benefit all investors as well. So look for this term peak earnings to cause a bit of a stir. A lot of people may think that this is as good as it gets. But I'm going to go out on a limb and say, I don't think so. And I think the market can continue to move higher, albeit in a choppy way, but it will continue to move higher between now and the course of the end of the year. Canadian banks will report earnings this coming week, and many of us are expecting some really blowout numbers. If US banks are any indication as to how Canadian banks have fared over the last quarter, I think that's going to be a really good sign. And so I look for these Canadian banks, Royal Bank, TD Bank, all the top 5 major banks to report really, really good earnings. I expect them to all report less money set aside for bad debt or bad loans. And I think these banks have had a great run with respect to trading. And overall, I think lending has done extremely well. However, I'm going to tell all of you today that don't be surprised to see bank stocks actually fall in value after they report earnings. Because keep in mind, banks like Royal Bank, CIBC Bank, these banks are at all-time high prices. And so once again, keeping with this theme of this video, is this as good as it gets? A lot of investors may sell into these earnings reports because these banks have had such a great run up into these earnings reports. So don't be discouraged or surprised if these bank stocks sell off a little bit after they report earnings, because these earnings reports will just be confirmation of the most recent run-up. But I think these banks over the long term still work. They provide great dividends and great growth opportunities. Every 2 weeks, we provide some really, really great videos for everyone to learn about what's happening over the next couple of weeks. What would you like to hear about? What would you want me to comment on? Send me a message through any of my social media channels or direct message me through my website. I'd love to know what you're thinking about these videos and what possible topics you'd like for future videos to come.